What if Jesus did not merely heal a handful of people in first-century Galilee? What if he revealed a secret principle for curing all diseases? And what if that secret has been hidden from you for 2,000 years? Not lost, not forgotten, hidden, shelved by the very institution that claims to speak in his name. That is a bold claim. It sounds like a conspiracy. It feels like an accusation. But stay with me. Because once you see what the early texts actually say, the question is no longer whether the secret was buried. The question is why you were never told it existed. Most people know the stories. Jesus touches a blind man and he sees. He speaks a word and a paralyzed woman stands. He casts out fevers, leprosy, and demons with what looks like effortless authority. The church calls these miracles, proof of his divinity, events to be admired from a distance. But what if they were never meant to be admired? What if they were meant to be understood? What if Jesus was not performing exceptions to a rule, but demonstrating the rule itself? A rule that applies to every human being. A rule that the early church quietly buried beneath layers of doctrine, mediation, and control. Because a Jesus who heals a few people can be worshipped. But a Jesus who reveals how you can heal yourself cannot be controlled. That is the fracture line. One version of Jesus says, "Look what I can do." The other says, "Look what you have forgotten you can do." One leaves you on your knees. The other lifts you to your feet. And the difference is not minor. It is the difference between a religion of dependency and a path of awakening. To understand what Jesus actually revealed about disease, you have to go back before the doctrines hardened. Back to the first centuries when different Christian communities held different memories. In those memories, healing was not a sign of Jesus' uniqueness. It was a sign of what becomes possible when a human being fully awakens to the divine spark within. The spark that is not just in him. The spark that is in you. The canonical Gospels themselves contain traces of this secret, but they are buried beneath later interpretations. Jesus tells his disciples, "Whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and even greater works." He doesn't say, "Only I can heal." He says, "You will do what I do." He tells the crowd, "Your faith has healed you," not his power, their faith. He gives instructions: forgive, release, do not fear, do not judge. He never says, "Beg God to heal you." He says, "The kingdom is inside you." What if he meant that literally? What if the kingdom is not just a spiritual metaphor, but the actual source of wholeness for the body and the mind? And what if disease is not a random punishment from God, but a signal from the depth of your being? A signal that something has fallen out of alignment with that kingdom. The Gnostics understood this clearly. They did not see Jesus as a visiting God who broke the laws of nature to impress people. They saw him as a revealer who demonstrated the true nature of reality. In their view, the material world is a shadow, a dense vibration, a dream produced by a lower creator who is blind to the fullness above. In that dream, bodies get sick, minds get troubled, death appears to rule. But the dream is not ultimate. The spark within you is not a product of the dream. It comes from beyond it. It belongs to the pleroma, the divine fullness. And when that spark awakens, its light begins to harmonize the layers of your being. The mind clears. The emotions settle. The body follows. That is the secret the Gnostic Jesus came to reveal. Not a technique, not a formula, but a reorientation of your entire consciousness. A shift from identifying with the broken creature to remembering the divine spark. And from that shift, healing flows. Not as a reward, not as a miracle, but as a natural consequence of returning to what you truly are. This is not wishful thinking. It is not a denial of medicine. The Gnostics were not naive about suffering. They lived under Roman occupation. They saw plagues, persecutions, and death. But they understood that the root of all disease lies deeper than the body. It lies in forgetfulness, in separation, in the illusion that you are only this fragile flesh cut off from the source, vulnerable to every wind. Jesus came to wake you from that illusion. He said, "I am the light that is over all things." Then he said, "You are the light." He did not say, "I have what you lack." He said, "Recognize what you already are, and what you bring forth will save you." That is the core of the secret. The Gospel of Thomas preserves it with clarity. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. What is within you? The divine spark, the seed of light, the unbroken connection to the source that the world has taught you to ignore. When you bring it forth, when you align your consciousness with it, the whole organism realigns. The body begins to heal. The mind begins to clear. Dis-ease loses its grip. Because dis-ease is not primarily a biological malfunction. It is a state of being out of alignment with your own deepest nature. That is what the word literally means. Dis-ease. A lack of ease. A friction between the surface self and the spark beneath. Jesus did not come to patch up the surface self. He came to dissolve it. He did not come to make you a slightly healthier ego. He came to wake you up to the light that needs no healing because it was never sick. But here is the uncomfortable question. If this secret is so powerful, why is it not preached from every pulpit? Why did the church build hospitals and healing shrines while hiding the inner key? Why do millions pray for healing and receive only silence, while the Master said, "Ask and you shall receive"? The answer is not comforting, because a church that controls access to healing controls people. A priesthood that dispenses miracles holds power. If the faithful believe that healing comes only through saints, relics, pilgrimages, and ordained rituals, they remain dependent. They return. They pay. They obey. But if they discover that the healer is within them, the entire machinery of religious mediation collapses. You do not need a priest to access the divine spark. You do not need a shrine to connect to the source. You do not need a bishop to forgive your sins so that your body can mend. The spark is already in you. The kingdom is already in you. And Jesus said so. The early church fathers understood the danger. Irenaeus, the great enemy of the Gnostics, condemned those who taught that healing comes through inner knowledge rather than through the church's sacraments. He called them arrogant. He said they led people away from the true faith. But what was the true faith? It was a system where grace flowed through channels controlled by the clergy, where the body of Christ was dispensed from an altar, not recognized in the depths of the soul, where miracles were rare and required official recognition. The Gnostics were not opposed to grace. They simply knew that grace is not rationed by men. It pours into every soul that turns inward and remembers. And so their texts were burned. Their communities were scattered. Their teaching was labeled heresy. And the secret was buried not because it was false, but because it was too liberating. So, what exactly is this inner healing that Jesus demonstrated? It is not positive thinking. It is not visualization or affirmation. It is not a technique you can learn in 5 steps and apply like a tool. It is a fundamental shift in identity, a shift from the false self to the true self, from the personality constructed by fear and memory to the spark that was never born and never dies. The Gnostic texts describe this shift in detail. The false self, the ego, lives in a state of perpetual lack. It feels separate. It feels threatened. It clings, defends, and attacks. That state of contraction produces tension. And tension, held over time, becomes dis-ease in the body. The body is a faithful servant. It mirrors the state of the consciousness that inhabits it. When the consciousness is fragmented, the body fragments. When the consciousness is in conflict, the body inflames. When the consciousness is rigid, the body stiffens. Jesus knew this. When he said, "Your faith has healed you," he was not being polite. He was identifying the mechanism. Faith is not belief in a doctrine. Faith is trust in the goodness of the source. It is the relaxation of the false self's desperate grip. It is the opening of the heart to the light that is already present. And in that opening, the body realigns. This is not magic. It is the law of your being. The Gnostics called it gnosis, direct inner knowing of your divine origin, not intellectual knowledge, not theology, but a visceral recognition that you are not separate from God. You are an expression of God, a spark of the same fire. And when you live from that recognition, the cells of your body respond. They stop defending against a threat that does not exist. They stop producing stress hormones for a battle that is over. They return to their natural state, which is wholeness. Jesus demonstrated this perfectly. He was so fully identified with the source that the shadows of the world did not touch him. He could enter the sickness of another person and not be infected because he saw through the illusion. He saw the perfect spark in everyone, even when they could not see it themselves. And his seeing was so clear that it awakened the same clarity in them. Their bodies responded. Their minds cleared. They were healed, not because he did something to them, but because he helped them remember what they had forgotten. That is why he often said, "Your faith has healed you." It was never his power alone. It was the power of their own spark, ignited by his presence. And then he said, "You will do greater things than these." He meant it. He was not creating a religion of worship. He was launching a revolution of awakening, a revolution in which every human being reclaims their birthright as a child of the light, a child who can walk through the shadows without fear, a child who can heal and be healed. Why did the church hide this? Because a revolution cannot be managed. A revolution has no hierarchy, no central office, no collection plate. A revolution of awakening spreads like fire. It needs no permission. It recognizes no authority outside the soul itself. The institutional church, from the 4th century onward, was not a revolution. It was an empire. And empires do not survive by telling their subjects that the power is within them. They survive by telling them the power is outside, in the throne, in the temple, in the sacrament, and that you need a mediator to reach it. So the secret was buried. The healing power of gnosis was replaced with rituals of intercession. The direct experience of the light was replaced with doctrines about the light. The Jesus who awakened the spark was replaced with the Jesus who demands submission. And generation after generation, people have prayed for healing and heard silence. Not because God is distant, but because they were taught to look in the wrong direction. They were taught to look up at the ceiling. Jesus said to look within. So, what does this mean for you, right now, in your own life? Maybe you are carrying something, a chronic condition, a persistent pain, an emotional wound that will not close. Maybe you have prayed. Maybe you have begged. Maybe you have felt abandoned. The Gnostic Jesus says to you, the kingdom is inside you. Not was, not will be, is, right now. The spark that heals is not something you have to earn. It is something you have to recognize. Beneath the layer of symptoms, beneath the layer of fear, beneath the layer of the false self that says, I am broken, I am sick, I am alone. There is a silence, a stillness, a light that has never been touched by any disease. That light is what you really are. And when you rest your attention there, even for a moment, something shifts. The body feels it. The mind softens. The dis-ease begins to lose its grip. Not because you forced it to leave, but because you stopped feeding it with the energy of separation. You stopped identifying with the version of yourself that is sick. You remembered the version that is whole. That is the practice. Not a technique, but a return. A return to the inner sanctuary where the spark lives. A return to the silence beneath the noise. A return to the light that was never extinguished. Jesus did not come to give you something new. He came to remind you of something ancient, something that predates your birth, something that will survive your death. The healer is within you. The secret is not a method. It is a memory. And the church did not hide it because it was false. The church hid it because it was too powerful. A people who know their own divinity cannot be ruled. A people who know the healer is within cannot be sold salvation. A people who have tasted gnosis cannot be satisfied with doctrine. You are that people. The spark is still there, and the voice of the living Jesus is still speaking to anyone who will listen. In the silence, in the stillness, in the quiet recognition that you are not broken, you are not abandoned. You are a spark of the divine fire, dreaming that you are a body, dreaming that you are sick, dreaming that you are separate. Wake up and let the dream dissolve. The secret is no longer hidden. It is in your hands now. What will you do with it? If this stirred something in you, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Gnostic Archive as we continue uncovering truths buried beneath the surface of reality. Truths the world taught you to ignore, because sometimes the most powerful healing is not in a pill or a ritual. It is in the simple, radical act of remembering who you truly are. And that is where the real journey begins.